So, by all rights, a battle taking place in 1912 between two fairly modern, fairly well-armed fleets, for their levels, should have had a massive, significant impact on the development of naval weaponry and naval forces in the period. But it doesn't. The Battle of Elli is both interesting because it does appear to show that speed offers an advantage in combat, and it does appear to show that gunnery control and fine gunnery control matters. And it also shows that, if you have a commanding ability of maneuver and etc. in a naval battle, you can do great things. The trouble is, there are three problems. One, the fleet that's fighting this is really not the most, despite not being that old, are not the most modern designs. They are ships which are mostly prior to Dreadnought designs. In which case, as modern as they might be, in comparative terms, by this point they're already considered old hat. And taking place in 1912 and going, well, look, speed. Speed has an option here. What are you going to do? Reinvent the battlecruiser? That's been around for about 6 years by this point. It's not going to happen. So the Battle of Elli is one of these battles which is really interesting. A lot of stuff to learn from it. But as significant as it should be on paper, just doesn't have the impact. It just doesn't have the impact. And it's part of the First Balkan War, but in many ways comes out of the Greco-Turkish War. In the Greco-Turkish War had been an absolute clusterfudge. Is what we're going to go with. Clusterfudge for the Greeks. Absolute clusterfudge. They hadn't really moved their forces on since the Wars of Independence, and whilst the Ottoman Turks had to sort of upgrade themselves. They worked with the Germans a bit. They managed to strengthen their armies to an extent that they literally did romp the field. They got stopped because basically they got told by the other large European powers, particularly Britain and France, that if they went any further, then things could get very interesting. In that sort of way where you see a sort of two people fighting they're usually B characters in a movie, and what the sort of, how do I put this, the A frontline character, the one that's the most dangerous, the one that we all fairly pretty much know is going to be doing the lion's share of the massacring of any of the bad guys in the actual end fight scenes, sits there just quietly while toying with a knife, maybe cleaning their nails or something, goes, "I'm busy, stop it." That's the sort of scenario we're talking about at the end of the Greco-Turkish War. Which upsets the Ottomans for another reason, because it kind of reveals to them that they are not maybe great power status anymore, when they realise that they have to pay attention to the great powers. And they ain't in them. Other powers can perhaps ignore these things, but they can't. So the Greco-Turkish War had been terrible. Now it happens in 1897. 15 years before our battle. It still takes the Greeks a fair while to get around to actually fixing the problems, because they spend the first few years debating what they're going to do. The first 2 years are spent debating, well, did we lose because we lacked elan? No. Did we lose because we lacked martial vigour? No. Why did we lose? Logistics and training. Well, that's boring. No, more honour, more pride. No, logistics and training. You just want to ruin my fun. I'd love to say that sarcastic bit I just did was not an accurate retelling of the debate, but go and look up the discussions. Eventually, The side going logistics and training wins the argument. Mostly because I think the side going elan and bravery gets bored and goes off to find something else new to shout about. It's rather a sad fact of history, but you'll normally find lots of newspapers, etc., will be happy to talk about elan and bravery, we need more honour, or this generation's not as done as the previous generation, all that stuff. No. It comes down to three things in life: infrastructure, logistics, and training. If you have enough properly trained people, you have the logistics to supply them, and the infrastructure to make that logistics viable, and make their deployment accessible, you will tend to win the wars. You will at least probably not lose. If your enemy is the same as you. Because usually the reason countries fall apart is one of those three things breaks down: training, logistics, or infrastructure. It's that simple. Doesn't matter whether it's a naval war, land war, what it is. It's very unsexy to talk about this. It's very boring. It's very accountancy-like, but it's very simple. If you have the infrastructure, if you have the logistics, and if you have enough trained strength, you can tend to win the wars. And by the way, yes, in that is included is equipment procurement. That's included because, nice way, there's no point having trained personnel. You can't really have trained personnel unless they get to train on the equipment they're going to use in the war. Then they're not trained. They are simulated. So there's all sorts of criteria going through that. But pretty much the Greco-Turkish War is a classic example of, but we got our independence with these forces. Yes, but the forces you waged guerrilla war for independence and get independence with are very different than the forces you need to fight a land war with, and especially very different to what you need to fight a modern land war of mobility with. And let's be honest, you're not talking about a post-Napoleonic war, you're talking about a post-American Civil War army, you're talking about a post-Franco-Prussian war. That'd been 1870. You're talking about a lot of wars had gone on since the Napoleonic era. Warfare had moved on and adapted, mostly thanks to the improvement of logistics and infrastructure. The mass production facilities available for artillery, for infantry weaponry, for equipment, all these things had, to an extent, mechanized wars. They certainly turned them into mass wars. They changed the reality of it. You're not dealing with, oh, the army's going to come down here and we're going to go up there and fight. No, that army's going to split into four if they're a well-trained army, and you might be blocking them here, but if the other three positions get round you, you're going to be in a scenario where you can maybe fight that one, but those three are behind you. Maybe one of them moves into a blocking position, and the other two columns go and take your city, your capital city, and then you've lost the war. Yeah, you held up a column. War had changed. Rather, it had evolved in that you can now support the four columns. They'd always wanted to do that. The Romans had done that. Lots of people had done that. But it's having the logistics, the infrastructure, bureaucratic organisation behind it to actually make it viable. And here's the fun thing. They actually get around to having we must get the training in, we must get the organisation set up, had finally decided in 1911. Okay? Technically 1910. So, 13 of the 15 years between these two wars had passed, and finally they get around to the point of going, you know what, we have to admit it was the logistics and infrastructure thing. It was. So who are you getting? Well, the Germans advised the Ottomans for their army, so we're going to get the French in because, let's be honest, who spends more time thinking about how to fight the Germans than anyone else in the world? It's going to be the French. just obsessed with it. So if they're going to teach, so basically the people who spend their entire time working out how to fight the Germans are probably the best people to teach us to how to fight against the German-advised Ottomans. We'll hope. We'll hope. And naval? We could get the Italians. Oh, sorry, I'm joking, of course. No, no, we're never going to get the Italians. Then we'd have to give up our claims on the on various parts of the Adriatic and Aegean. No, we're going to go for the Brits. Oh, good. And they get Vice Admiral Lionel Tufnell, who was formerly the Commandant of the Royal Navy Engineering College. Yes, that's who the Royal Navy sends out to sort out Greece. You'd think, we need an admiral to come sort us out. Okay, who are you sending? We need a tough fighting admiral. No, you don't. There's actual discussions of this in the British archives. You can go and look. It's a very interesting discussion of you're getting an engineer. You're getting someone who is an actual expert in infrastructure, logistics, and procurement for naval forces. We are? Yeah, he's called Lionel Tufnell. Now, one of the things he does is order the Salamis from Germany. The interesting thing is, you're talking about a ship which is the hull's built in Germany, the engines, turbines are coming from Britain, the guns are coming from America. It's a real battlefield hot rod. And there's actual discussions which go through, and there's papers going back and forth about why he's picking a German design, not a British design. And he could have gone to a British yard, he could have got a British design, but what he needs is whilst for the Ottomans, with their pretensions at still having the Ottoman Empire, they worry about the range of their ships and need them to be able to travel around, which is why they're looking at the British. The Greeks are like the Germans. They don't need something to be able to go everywhere. They need something to go into the Mediterranean, dominate the Mediterranean and the Aegean, and come back. Who is the best at building ships which are going to be really tough, but not really that long-legged at this time? Not really that long-ranged, in terms of actually operating them for a long period at sea. Or rather, who exchanges making their ships extra tough for them being less nice vessels to live on? It's the Germans. So who's the best option for him to go to get the... It's going to be the Germans. That's one of the interesting things about it. When you look at the admirals the Royal Navy supplied around, they do not just go, oh, we're going to buy British. No, they go, and the reason they're trusted is because they buy what is best for the situation they're in. He's ordering the Salamis because the German design methodology best suits the Greek position. Greece can't build it themselves. They cannot get a 100% match, therefore. They cannot build something which perfect. So therefore, you have to go for the design methodology which best suits them. But the German guns don't suit the Greek situation. They're too complicated. They're too difficult to maintain. So therefore, he's left an option of British or American guns. He decides the American guns are better for his needs for the Greeks. Because the Americans tend to keep out of alliances and they're in the European sphere at this point, and therefore they are a more guaranteed source of supply than the other powers. Why does he go for British engines? Why? Why does he go for Yarrow boilers? And there is a debate as to whether it was going to actually be AEG steam turbines or whether it's going to be Parsons. There's an argument. Now, there is an argument about this, about when it does change. We know that to an extent Parsons were under consideration because of, like the Yarrow boilers which were chosen, it's considered easier to get spare parts for them because there's more of them on the open market. There's more of them in production. You've got various facilities around the world which are producing variations on Yarrow boilers and Parsons turbines, so getting spares is slightly more functionally easier for the Greeks, but it does seem to be that quite early on it's going to be AEG turbines. But this does cause disquiet, and there is a part of me which wonders how long those turbines would necessarily have survived. Because remember, again, turbines in this period, they are expected to be changed every few years. It's considered you're probably gonna have a turbine rebuild every, for this generation turbines, every 6 to 10 years. So a ship which is supposed to last probably about 20 years in service could well have completely different turbines for the last half of its service. And if it lasts longer, and let's be honest, there is a one of the things which is often acknowledged by people like Tufnell and others who go, is that powers who are not the first-rate powers do not have the same pressures to replace units at the same time. For them, the viability spectrum can last a lot longer because it doesn't matter how good their one ship is. If they find themselves in a war with a first-rank power, i.e., in this period we're talking about Britain, France, Germany, America, Italy, Japan, to an extent coming through, they're in enough trouble already that there ain't anything hoping. There isn't any hope for them. They are going to be overwhelmed. They're going to be annihilated. Their one ship is great, but it might be better than any other one single ship that navy has. But the thing is, they're probably turning up with 15, and that changes the metric completely. So then it becomes, well, what do you have this for? Well, it's for dealing with the Ottomans. It's for dealing with other powers. And they're also not able to sustain replace as often. So therefore, you almost have a longer shelf life for assets when they are, as in terms of their viability, when they are being procured by powers who are lower down the level of the status level. So if you're a great power, or today would be called a superpower and a global power, you will probably have the pressure on you for you to maintain your status and your capabilities is far higher than, let's say, even a regional power, which are the two groups of major powers are regional and global, and below. You can make regional powers can make far more greater use of their equipment, can use it for far longer, and it can still be a viable piece of equipment for them to use, and they're happy to use it, than global powers or superpowers, because of the requirements for them to maintain that ability. Because no one wants to be the global power who becomes a regional power. No one wants to be the superpower who drops down a status. Because if you do, then you're going to lose a lot. You know, it might be something you don't even realize as a public, but losing that status, losing that capability, that's going to undermine you all the way. It's going to cause you to have to reevaluate your entire position. It's going to affect your currency exchange. It's going to affect your insurance. It's going to affect your status in terms of negotiations and trade deals. And it's going to have knock-on impacts at every single level of your economy, because we do live in a globalized world. And status matters in a globalized world. Status matters in everything. You want a good example of that? Have a look around your office. Have a look around your school. Have a look around any group or organization you're in, and see how it is to be the higher status individuals. Yes, they have more responsibility. Yes, they have more stress because they have this greater responsibility. But they also tend to get more out of it. They get more say. They get more influence over things. They have a better control over how things happen. So that tends to benefit them in terms of their ability to get the most out of things. The higher your status, the higher your position within an organization, within a society, within a state, it tends to give you the most a greater power to influence what's going on around you. And that tends to give you greater security, but also tends to allow you to plan better, which allows you to better take advantage of opportunities when they come through. It's the same for countries as it is for people. It really is. So yeah, after the Greeks had that, they start talking with the other Balkan powers, and you have the Balkan League start to be formed. And the Balkan League is an interesting organization because mainly they hate each other, but they hate the Ottomans more. They really do. And whilst we might call sometimes today Poland the little European Texas, No. In this period, you have Bulgaria, who are the Little Balkan Prussia. And when I say Little Balkan Prussia, I mean the Little Balkan Prussia. Their army is massive. Their people are heavily trained. They have put everything into forming a mass mobilization force. In this scenario, where honestly Greece was. Well, to be honest, they're a second rank power in this. The second rank in the Balkan League, not because their army is bigger than Montenegro's, but that's not really saying much. Montenegro is tiny. Tiny. It's the fact they're the only ones who actually have a navy. The Bulgarians, mighty army. We have some torpedo boats. Mighty army. Torpedo boats. Mighty army. Torpedo boats. The Serbs were just not even going there. Montenegrins, nothing. So, realistically, the only force which can stop the Ottomans being able to resupply from their Asian territories, or rather Asia Minor territories, to their European territories, are the Greeks. They are the valiantest. They are worth hundreds of thousands of troops, not because of what they can put in the field, but because of what they can prevent getting to the field. Because as I've said before, the power of an empire is strategic mobility around that empire. If you're able to mobilize all the resources from the various disparate parts of the empire to focus on the point of problem, then you are able to overwhelm. It's one of the things which I also have to sort of get into is when we're talking about World War I or World War II, why does the Battle of the Atlantic matter? Why does the convoy war matter? Why do these conflicts, these things matter? Because if the British cannot mobilize all the empire, thanks to that maritime capability, then they are actually comparatively quite weak. But if they can mobilize all that, if they can maintain that empire, if they can keep that running, that's what gives them the strength. That's what makes them first amongst the equals for the 19th century. That's what gives them the power and the status. Because of their ability to mobilize that empire. And that's what gives them the overwhelming power versus pretty much any other power other than the Americans, who have all that power but have it on one continent. And people tend to go, well, what about the Russians? Well, the Russians are honestly almost too big, because they're so big they can't actually support their different forces and they can't get them round. The Americans would be in a similar scenario as the Russians, honestly, if you don't have the Panama Canal. Otherwise, the Two Ocean Navy Act would really have been Two Ocean Navy Act, i.e., we will have two navies. Because without the Panama Canal, it takes so much time to get round, and it is so risky to get round, especially with smaller vessels, that pretty much you do end up with two navies. So, for the Greeks, this is also problematic, and honestly, this is one of the reasons why Greece occasionally, the various people flirt with the idea of building some sort of canal to link up the various waterways and sides of Greece, etc. Because, well, it's to get ships backwards and forwards. And for the Russians and the Soviets, especially, invested a lot in canals. It's one of the reasons why they invest as much in canals as they do, to try and have internal waterways between things like the Baltic, the White Sea, and the Black Sea. They don't really have ship canals, but they do have extensive internal waterways which do allow you to connect quite a large chunk of it. And the First Balkan War is a good example of this, because of the limitations of this, if you can stop them. Because realistically, the reason why the Balkan League are able to run the table, are able to decide, and able to act as they do in this conflict, is because very quickly the Greeks do amphibious operations, seize islands, seize bases, get closer and closer, and then block the Ottoman fleet in to the Dardanelles. They block them in. And that means no reinforcements getting through. No ability to maneuver forces by sea, no ability to resupply those forces by sea, no ability to get logistics in by sea. And when you consider the capabilities of the roads and the railways in this area, in this period, that becomes a deciding factor. Which leads us to the Shameless book plug. Shameless book plug! Yay! Okay, so I do this in every single video because it's a couple of minutes, and it's basically me going, thank you for supporting the channel, thank you for liking, sharing, and subscribing, thank you for doing all that and helping the channel grow and reaching more people, because that's what I do this for. But also, all the funding, of course, for the channel, all the funding goes into funding my research. All the money goes towards that. That's how I fund and pay for my research. That's how I pay to be able to write books. And it's all thanks to you. It has been ever since this channel first began. Let's be honest. I was writing this book and trying to work out how I was going to get it published and how I was going to get it, you know, all the pictures paid for and all the pictures sorted out for it when I started doing the work. And when I started doing this, so putting this all together, it was during COVID and I started this channel. And first it was just for my students, and then it was for other people to enjoy, and then Drax turned around and went, why aren't you using this to fund your research? I went, instead of writing all those grant applications? Yeah. Let's be honest, it takes a not inconsiderable amount of time to do the channel, but compared to grant applications, it's about the same amount of time. But I would honestly recommend it more because whilst grant committees, you can very rarely understand why things do well, usually, or don't do well. Usually with videos, you can work out, well, it's a popular topic, well, it was done in it, I must have done it quite well, oh, I did a very good thumbnail for that one, forget. But I still liked it, and lots of other people who watched this liked it, so, yeah. It's far easier. It's far easier to work out. And, yeah, there are going to be more books soon, and that's all thanks to you. And all that support is thanks to you. And yeah, we've got this. I really should change this for an up-to-date one. They will be up-to-date soon, but this isn't the older one. But yeah, we've got lots of videos coming up. Lots and lots of videos coming up. And this week especially coming, we've got the week of the 30th December. The Battle of the Barents Sea is the Thursday live video. Oh, that's going to be a fun one. And Command Switch for the premiere on Wednesday. That'll be good as well. So we have Rear Admiral Pavlos Kountouriotis, who is, Kountouriotis, Pavlos Kountouriotis, who is in charge of the Greek fleet in this battle. And these three quotes really do, I feel, sum him up pretty darn well. He's a career naval officer, yes, and he's a capable naval officer, certainly. He's also someone who fundamentally understands that in order to win wars, you need to fight battles. And he sends this to the Ottomans on 24th of October. We have captured Tenedos. We wait the exit of your fleet. If you need coal, I can supply you. It can sound a really lovely gesture, until you realize that if we go to here, you'll see Tenedos is where that little star is. And the Ottoman Fleet was based in here. In that sort of pit. So basically, he's going, come on, fight me! Come on! I'm really close. Come get me. If you haven't got coal, I'll give you coal to come out and fight me. It's kind of a statement of confidence. A little bit of confidence is going on here. This is what he sends around to the fleet. By the power of God, the blessings of our king, and in the name of the right, I sail with unstoppable momentum with the conviction of the victory against the enemy of the nation. It's mobilizing you. And after the battle, many years later, when he's being asked about his actions in the battle, where he famously detaches his flagship from the rest of his fleet and charges off to try and fight the enemy himself, very much take me closer, I need to hit the enemy with my sword energy going on. Warships are not ornaments. History shows us that no nation can be the ruler of the seas without seeing the ships being put in danger, and even sinking them, if necessary, as its destiny. That's very true. It's also very scary for a power like Greece, which only has a limited number of ships, to be thinking that way. But it's how you have to think. If you don't risk the ships, if you don't use the ships, then you might as well not have the ships. There is no point having ships and not using them. They lose all value. Which is also probably why you need to also maintain a certain mass and volume of ships to make sure you can afford to use them and afford to lose them. Because if you can't afford to lose them, then you might be tempted not to use them, and then there's no point in having them in the first place. Now, the capital ships of any generation have always been slightly iffy on that scale, and always have been slightly a case of, whoa, we don't want to lose them. And that's probably the truth. It's always going to be the truth, because they're always going to be so valuable you don't want to lose them. They're always going to be so few in number you don't want to lose them. It doesn't matter whether they're first rates and second rates in the age of sail. It doesn't matter whether they are modern aircraft carriers or battleships in the 1920s and 30s. You don't want to lose them. You will never have enough. But you still have to risk them. But I think that's what makes this battle to me most interesting, because the ship that he's risking is an armoured cruiser. It's technically at that third-rate level. It's technically at that level at which you are supposed to be able to risk it. And if you lose it, well, you accept it. And that's what really makes things interesting, because he's commanding. His flagship is an armoured cruiser. It's a very powerful, very effective armoured cruiser, but it's still an armoured cruiser. It's not a battleship. Neither a coastal battleship or a full fleet battleship. It is an armoured cruiser. It is technically, according to most nations' metrics at this point, a third rate. If you want to go through that sort of rating system and work it out. And that's what he's going to risk. The expendable level of capital ship. Or, let me put it this way, more likely, the riskable level of capital ship. The capital ship that, if we lose a powerful unit, yes, but we don't necessarily lose the war, because we still have the firepower to hold them off. Especially as such a vessel is not going to go down easy. That's the thing about a ship. When we look at them through history, people sort of talk about these things through and go, well, first rate, second rate, third rate. And the thing is, a first rate will not run over a third rate. It will be a fight. It should win it because it's got the extra gunnery deck and because it's got the weight of broadside and it's got the height, so it's all these things. It should win against a third rate. But it's not going to be a walkover. It's not going to be easy. The first rate will probably take a lot of damage in that fight. That's the same with this armoured cruiser versus a battleship in this period. An armoured cruiser might be bigger than most battleships because they're built in cruiser form, and when I say cruiser form, they're going to be longer with larger internal spaces, more suitable for longer voyages and going around the world and spending more time aboard them, because usually cruisers do spend more time aboard them. This is something else you have to sometimes explain to people about ships, isn't it? In this period, unless you're a major empire, your battle fleet wasn't really going to operate that far away from you. The people who are talking about distance for battle fleet operations are Britain, France, America to an extent. They're the ones who are worried about space for crew living quarters and living expenses because of where they need to go and where they need to operate their fleet. The others don't. And the same with destroyers and torpedo boats. They're not going that far. You're not going to be on board them for that long, and then you're going to be home and you're going to be ashore, or you're going to have everything open and you're going to be basically living part on the ship and part on a tender. But cruisers are what you're supposed to be able to send around the world for your presence mission, for your diplomacy missions, for your status. So yeah, they're the ones designed with the quarters to live on. Which is another reason why I tend to argue that all modern warships are cruisers. Because they're all designed to be that. You just have frigates, which are anti-submarine warfare cruisers, and destroyers, which are usually air warfare cruisers. they're all cruisers because they do the cruising role and they have to be designed according to cruising lines with habitability reasons, which is also why they're the size they are. So, the Ottoman fleet, let's consider them. And why have I not touched on the Ottoman Admiral? Well, because, honestly, we know so little about him that, frankly, he might as well not exist. And when I say we know so little about Ramiz Bey, I have looked through the Turkish sources. I have looked through every single section I can on this, and I can honestly find out nothing on him. I have gone hunting through the internet. I have gone hunting through all sorts of operations to try and track it down. And what can I say? This man is hoisted by the petard of his own Navy Minister and the rules he puts on him, where he doesn't want him to lose anything, and he wants him to conserve the fleet, and the fleet has to survive. It's fleet and being strategy. It's completely fleet and being strategy. And that makes sense to an extent, but that means you've hamstrung your fleet. You've got 2 Brandenburg-class battleships. Yes, they're Royal Sovereign-style battleships. Yes, they're not the greatest of the Royal Sovereign-style battleships, but they're still capable ships. They're capable warships, capable of doing a lot of damage. They are armed with 6 11-inch guns, 4 which are 40 cals and 2 which are 35 cals. They have 8 4-inch guns. They have 8 88mm. They have, and I know technically they're 3.5-inch, but let's be honest. At the moment it's a German, it's an 88mm as soon as you see that. And 3 18-inch torpedo tubes. They have armour, they have everything they need. They are good, solid ships. They're not the greatest ships, but they're not bad ships to be going into battle in this period. Okay, if you're going against the Royal Navy, or the mass dreadnoughts, or the dreadnoughts of even the US Navy, they're not what you want to be in, but for the Ottoman Empire, they're perfectly fine for dealing with the Greeks. After all, when we get to the Greek fleet, they're not going to be much better. They have 2 armoured corvettes, the Saratovic and the Mesidiae, which do look like they come out of HMS Warrior's construction, really, but they are actually central battery ironclads. It had started out like this, literally a central battery ironclad, but by this period it looks like this, after modifications. Now, if you're looking at going, Alex, that looks horrible. Yes, it does look horrible. It carries on, though. The poor ship is constantly being abused throughout its life with more and more ideas of things they're going to do. And it's actually fitted for 2 230mm guns. That's 9.2-inch guns. But they don't seem to actually be fitted. They don't seem to actually be mounted hidden by the time of the fight. There's a whole debate about it, and there's a whole debate about what capabilities this vessel actually has in the war. Realistically, there are lots of ships which probably wouldn't have been there if it hadn't been for the Ottomans' issues with their own internal politics. And that thing is, since the Greco-Turkish War, whilst the Greeks have managed to slowly come around and get organised, the Ottomans have disintegrated under the Young Turks and various other things going on. Various internal debates. And the Ottoman Empire at this point has started to resemble one of those ongoing family drama soap-style things you have on television, where the main family's mothers, uncles, stepson has managed to be beaten up by the mob for the 4th week in a row and has had their leg broken for like the 4th time, and you're sitting there going, get a new script, please. Oh, but you can't look away because Do they just keep imagining more and more outlandish ways for the same thing to happen over and over again? So you're just like watching this car crash happen to this country in real time in front of you. If you read the history, you spend the whole time feeling very, very sorry for all the different people involved, because there are lots of people who are honestly trying their best to try and sort out the mess, but they just can't seem to get a hold of it. And there are also people trying top-down solutions, bottom-up solutions, sideways solutions. And realistically, what you probably need to do is just to have someone shut up and let it get fixed before you jump. Because the big problem they've got is there's always someone ready with the next plan to jump in and go, no, 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 my plan be better. We've barely given your plan any chance to work, but no, 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 I have a better plan, so we're going to come in and we're going to change everything again. And you just sit there and go, no, what you need is consistency. Consistency, invest in some infrastructure, invest in some logistics, get some training working, get a decent bureaucracy running sensibly. Bureaucracy is never going to be efficient, but you can have it being passable. Efficiency and bureaucracy don't go together, because the thing about bureaucracy is it's supposed to be about bringing lots of people involved to make it try and make the most palatable decision, not the best decision, the palatable decision. And making a palatable decision is never going to be efficient, because you can make the best decision efficient because you're going by raw data and going by this metrics, done, 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 x plus y equals z, done. But for bureaucracy, for governments, for all these things, you're of course going through, taking stakeholders and going, well, the position which is going to upset the least amount of people so that we can actually make it work is going to be Z over A. Okay. That's fine. Well, that's what we do. But it takes longer to get there. Well, that's because everyone has to be involved. Even in autocracies, there are lots of different factors who have to be involved. And so this is the fleet you have. I'm so glad no one did that to HMS Warrior. I would have, honestly, if someone had done that to HMS Warrior, you have probably heard the things I am tempted to do to the people who scrapped the Royal Navy destroyers post-World War II, especially the tribal class, and the fact that we've got no battleship remaining, or even an aircraft carrier from that period, fills me regularly of rage. If someone had done that to HMS Warrior, the likelihood is that me and Drac would have both been swinging axes at wherever we found anything remarkably remembering them. But leaving that to one side, we then have the Greek fleet. And the Greek fleet has two quite modern assets in it. It has the Georgios Avros, the armoured cruiser, in the question we were talking about earlier, and it has the brand new destroyers from Shameless. They'd been previously being built for Argentina, but Argentina had what normally happens to South American nations at this point, economic issues, and so the Greeks had swooped in and bought them, and they got 4 very decent destroyers from Shameless. And as I did in the recent video about the Trouble class destroyers of 1907, the pre-World War I ones, Shameless are a good destroyer builder. They're a good, solid destroyer constructor. Okay, they're not going to be quite as insane as Thornycroft built ones, but they're going to be good. Thornycroft, for those who don't know, are basically a company who make Porsche, who of course believe that, you add power and lightness to make a car go fast. Thornycroft have been doing that for a lot longer, and they're a little bit more unhinged than Porsche ever have been when it comes to how much power can we put into this vessel. How much power? They're scary people. And 3 Hydra-class ironclad coastal battery battleships. These. So realistically, in a fight, the things you've got to get through if you are the Ottomans are this and this, which theoretically these should do. Theoretically. They've got enough guns that they should be able to deter the destroyers, keep them far enough away that they can get land and blow, and basically overwhelm. They're not going to be able to catch this shit. They're not going to be able fast enough to catch it. It's far faster, but they are. It can do the full 23.5 knots at maximum speed with force and everything going. Normally 20 knots, but do 23.5 knots. Whereas their battleships, if you're lucky, on a good day, 16.5 knots. So it has a 3.5 knot to 6.5 knot speed advantage. That's not a dictating speed advantage. That's a decimating speed advantage. But the thing is, the rest of the battle fleet ain't that fast. So you can do this. You can do this. So let's look at a preamble. Now, it must be remembered that in this phase, the Ottomans spent a lot of time worrying about the Greek submarine. The Greeks had picked up a submarine from the French just prior to the war, kind of like how they picked up the destroyers. And they expected to be operating with a fleet. It's rarely is operating a fleet. It's usually doing other duties. And frankly, operating with the fleet would have tied the fleet down quite a lot. The Ottomans had actually been trying to purchase ships equivalent to the Avarov. They had tried to purchase the Blucher or the Molka. For some reason, they hadn't got either. It is a really interesting course of history where the Germans basically go, the Blucher is terrible. It does not fit our situation. Hand it over to the Ottomans. It could change this battle completely. Because the Blucher has enough firepower and has enough capability that, frankly, even the Georges Avarov would have been in trouble. Being faster, more heavily armed, better armoured, newer in many ways newer and more capable, it would have really damaged the Avarov. But nope, the Kaiserlich Marine had not sold, and so the Ottomans don't have that. And pretty much the war's been raging, and then by December the 14th, 1912. They're sitting there, the Ottomans are sitting there going, well, what are we going to do? What are we going to do? Because the Greeks have got closer and closer and closer. As I said, they've got to this point. They have no choice. They have to go fight them. But they also have the fact that their commander, Ramiz, has orders not to risk the fleet. The Ottomans are very focused on what is going on in terms of the submarine, in terms of Greek strength, and they know if they lose the fleet, then they have lost more, because if they lose their fleet, then suddenly they can't control this bit. In which case, they might well lose the entire European portion of their empire, including Constantinople, including their capital city. That's a very real threat they're worrying about at this point. That's a real threat they worry about a lot. And for the Greeks, that's a prize. But it's not just a prize for them. The Bulgarians and the Russians, they're all Orthodox Christians. They all see Constantinople as having great value, or Istanbul as it is nowadays, though. They're all aiming for it. Whoever gets it gets a very powerful position within the hierarchy of nations in this grouping. Gets a very influential position. For Bulgaria, it's of value because it gives them access to the Mediterranean. For the Russians, it's of value. They're not technically part of this war, but if they see the Ottomans collapsing that much, the Russians might take advantage. Remember, the Russians are not that long after the Russo-Japanese War. They are still hurting. They're still smarting. They are preparing and warming themselves up, and they are rebuilding. They have capabilities now. Making a dash to take Constantinople would be worth it. If they thought they could get it, if they thought they could do it, they would do it. So there are lots of pressures going on the Ottoman naval forces. they're a deterrent. They are a capability that's trying to keep themselves alive, but the area of sea control they can achieve is very limited. Within support of the forts and the other systems, they are a strong thing because they can stop you being able to concentrate your fire on the forts and allow the forts to tell on you. But it's within range of the forts, and that's one of the reasons why they've been held back as they have. Now, again, Greek destroyers keep being very active, and Greek vessels keep being active, but they are waiting for the Ottomans to come out. And it's only on the 16th of December. The 16th of December at 6 a.m. You find the Greek force north of Imbros advancing. Avarov in the lead, followed by the destroyers screening the main battle line, those old coastal battleships. And the destroyers were screening to the Dardanelles side, so they were on the eastern side of the line. At various points, you have a destroyer fight going on. You have a thick fog. And the Ottomans' 1st Destroyer Division spotted the Greek force and turns back to tell their senior officers what's going on. At which point they try to adapt. The forces try to adapt. They know that the Greeks want to cross their T. Why? Because it's a commanding position. It's when the enemy has the smallest amount of guns focused on the bitter, and you have the biggest amount of guns focused on them. Okay? Now, good example of the sort of thinking which this leads to. If that's going to be the strongest position, then how do you invert the T from being the strongest position? That's where things like the F3, G3, and O3 designs of the Royal Navy, i.e. the nail rods, come in, because then it kind of reverses the angle, because instead of the smallest amount of guns focused on the smallest amount of guns versus the biggest amount of guns focused on you, you've got the smallest area and all your guns focused on them, the biggest area. It inverts the advantages of the T. Theoretically. The T is a very strong, therefore commanding position, and both forces will seek to achieve it. The advantage in seeking it always goes to the Navy, which has the speed advantage. Now, technically, the force advantage does lie with the Ottomans. But the speed advantage, thanks to the Jodros-Avarov, definitely survives with the Greeks. And definitely stays with the Greeks. By 0900 hours, you find them both in sort of battle formations, both sort of in their final form, about 17,000 meters apart, 17 kilometers. And it's at that point that signal of, by the power of God, the blessings of the king, is flown by Kountouriotis. And then it's what he also does is sort of a signal of, you sort of open fire simultaneously to the Admiral. So hold fire till the Admiral fires. At 0922 hours, the Ottoman fleet opens fire. By this point, they're down to a distance of 12,500 meters. The Greeks wait a little bit longer. They wait till they're a little bit closer, a little bit closer, waiting roughly 3 minutes, and they open fire once they're at a range of roughly 12,000 meters. And as such, battle commenced. At 9:35, well, things start to go a bit different. They've got to less than 10,000 meters. Some would put them as close as 9,000, some say 9,500. Kountouriotis realizes that his ships aren't fast enough. His ships aren't going to do it. So, yeah. He's hoists the Z flag. I move independently. Leaves his rear admiral in charge of the battle line, so as it were, and the destroyers. accelerates Avrov to about 21 knots, and does the T maneuver. There is nothing the Ottomans can really do about this at this point. They are in a position where if they maneuver to try and prevent him doing the T maneuver, then they expose themselves to the battle line. And that's realistically what you want. You want them to think they're going to get into a battle and they've managed to achieve getting in the battle line and then be caught off guard. So their options are going to be withdraw or try and fight in an unsatisfactory position. Now, outflanking the enemy alone, though, is not without risk. In fact, it's a massive risk, because if Avrov had got caught and had managed to be hit by a lucky shell and damaged, she would have been completely exposed with no support. She gets to less than 3,000 meters from the Ottoman fleet. And you can see the Ottoman maneuver here. You can see what they end up doing. They end up with a scenario of, okay, we cannot stop this ship. We are going to either be bracketed by both the Greek fleet and her, or we are going to find ourselves in other problems. So they execute what is basically a simultaneous 160-ish degree-ish turn. You can see little sort of the red lines going pop, 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 pop between two things. So, watch it. That. And yeah, they execute that and they withdraw because that's their instructions. Their fleet has to survive. And as they turn under these and they make this turn, they go under the coastal guns of the Seltara and Kumikali fortresses. And as they do that, they actually have to slow down to 10 knots because they're coming so close to each other that they are at risk of bashing into each other. And on top of that, they actually can't fire their guns because they're coming so close to each other. Which means that during that whole maneuver, they are being blasted by Avrov and the Greek battleships. The Greek battleships had managed to get to roughly 4,000 meters range, thanks to the Ottoman turning. At 09:55 hours, Barbarossa, the Hayden Barbarossa, one of those lovely German battleships, was hit on the stern deck, and a little later, another shell penetrates the stern turret and damages its boilers. Turget and the Mercedes suffer less damage by luck more than anything. Mostly it's the quality of gunnery, which is absolutely atrocious. But the thing is, they haven't got the latest gunnery control systems. Neither side has, really. Neither side's got up-to-date gunnery systems, and that's why they're considered so bad. This is one of the reasons why the lessons from this battle are so few and far between, because it's just taken as... basically, it's a great tactical battle, but it's nothing that we can't learn, we don't already have available, and their gunnery was terrible. At 10:17 hours, the naval battle sort of ends. The battle has been going on for... Let's be honest, they fired first at 09:05. Well, 09:20-ish. So, they'd have a warning signal. It's a little over an hour and 15 minutes, probably. In overall terms, it's probably an hour and 15 minutes the battle sort of realistically can be described as going on for. Maneuvering prior to that. And that's where we get into real trouble, because with the battle being over, you start having a look at it. Next consequence is the Battle of Lemos. And Lemos is when the Greeks are pushing on more and more. And Lemnos, this battle's caused by it because after the Battle of Elli, basically the Ottomans are so obsessed with trying to draw away the George Safarov They actually get a cruiser through, they manage to slip it through, and they have it raiding. And they wait till they hear the Greek government has ordered Kountouriotis to go off and pursue it. They obviously forget or haven't made a proper analysis of who Kountouriotis is, because Kountouriotis goes, nah, I'm not falling for that one. They're just trying to pull me out of position. I'm going to wait here for them to come out. And when they do come out, they get mullered again. They get their battleships damaged. They get their ironclad damaged. They come out with two big ships there, an ironclad, a protected cruiser, 5 destroyers. They run into the same fleet as pretty much we're at Elli, and it's a Greek victory. It's a Greek victory. And once again, the Greeks are left in control of the sea. And they make use of it. They're using it to maneuver their forces. Long-term consequences are the orders which come in. Let's be honest. This battle showed the problem for the Ottomans in that they were undergunned and under-equipped. The battleships they order, including the huge thing they're prepared to take from the Britain, what becomes HMS Agincourt, is entirely down to this piece of history. Because it's the Ottomans searching for a reason other than we've neglected the infrastructure, logistics, and training. There's got to be another reason. We don't have enough guns! Yeah. We need more modern, more powerful ships. Yep. You're going to have the logistics and infrastructure to support and sustain them? What do you think? That's always the problem. That's always the issue. For some reason, Kountouriotis basically gets constantly, from this point on, looked at by the governments with a bit of worry and suspicion, because they start to develop an idea that he doesn't take any notice of them, which I can't think why they don't take that. But he does a good job, so frankly, I wouldn't bother about it too much. Overall, the battle is... Look, if it had been another war, it would be called a skirmish. If it was in another war in, let's say, World War I between the British and the Germans, and there was a similar fight, it would be a skirmish. It would probably not even get the definition of a battle. It would be an engagement, or maybe an action. It would probably not merit being called a battle. But it's not between the major powers. It's between two medium powers, duking out with the fleet they have available. And they really do their best. They do their best. Ultimately, this is about, especially for Greece, about them regaining the martial pride which they'd had during their wars of independence. Subsequent Balkan wars are going to do severe damage to that, but this first Balkan war and the successes they had achieved, especially at sea, were about regaining that national pride and about showing their value to the world. And you can't place a price on that. But as a battle, basically just proves all the stuff we already know. Which is nice, it's helpful to have that. But it doesn't really change anything. And that leads us to the question of today's topic, which is the thing about leadership involved. And this is 2025 is the year of leadership. On one side, we have Admiral who becomes a national hero for basically ignoring good prudence and his government on several occasions. On the other side, we have someone who listens to his government, who does what his government does, asks him to, and is basically made a scapegoat and forgotten. I would argue that those sorts of lessons do not set up good precedents for your leadership. For the Greeks, whilst certainly Kountouriotis was right to make decisions he did, and there is always that procedure, as long as you are able to ignore the government, as long as what you do is correct and is within the government's overall aims, they will accept it. That's probably a fairly decent lesson, but not necessarily the greatest lesson for governments to have passed on to their senior officers. Because it starts off, the first part off with, governments can be wrong and you can be right and you can ignore them because of that. And that's always worrying for governments. But for the Ottomans, think about that. Their commander goes back and is court-martialed. He's persecuted and has to produce letters and things from the Navy Minister, etc., telling the people, these were the criteria of my job. These were what I was charged to do. The number one priority was for me to keep the fleet alive, and that's what I was operating under the criteria of. And still made the scapegoat. Still given all the blame. What does that send to your leaders? If anything goes wrong, the fault is going to stop with you, it ain't going to go up? That even if you follow all our orders, we're still going to hang you out to dry? Think about that from a morale perspective. In both cases, it's interesting to see how the governments respond to their leaders and how they treat them, and how they work with them. I'd like you to think about that, and I'd like you to think about other leaders who've been in similar situations, and what lessons you can draw from those leaders, from how their nations have acted them. And also, do you think it's worthwhile? Current leaders looking back and looking at how seniors is treated and going, what lessons can I learn from this? What can I rely on? Year of aircraft carriers also, of course, over. That was 2024, and the year of leadership is 2025. I'm looking forward to it. I hope you are too. Thank you very much for watching. Hope you had a nice time, and chat soon. Tomorrow's brew ships. And UAD streaming on Twitch. And maybe tonight, because, yeah, I've re-recorded this on the 28th, maybe tonight, will be Red Alert on Twitch. We'll see. Again, Red Alert 2. An oldie but a goodie game for Christmas season.